All right, welcome back to the Elias Macko Show. Let's talk some serious politics for a bit, shall we? Now, of course, we all know that Prime Minister Mark Carney unveiled his cabinet this week. He promised some bold change. Now, Justin Ling joins us on the line. He's a contributing columnist for the Toronto Star, and I took note of his opinion piece this week on Mark Carney's cabinet. Justin, welcome back to the program.
Hey, good morning.
Listen, the title of your piece in the Star, and I know you don't necessarily have a say in what the headline is, right? But it's with his new cabinet, Mark Carney is going for the wrong kind of change. But I'll be honest to our listeners, the reason why I said, hey, let's talk to Justin, is I thought headline aside, you're actually quite fair. I think you gave some good points, some negatives, some positives when it comes to the cabinet. So I really wanted to have you on because I think you were really fair in your assessment. So why don't you tell us, away from the headline here, what's your top-of-line assessment of Mark Carney's cabinet?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, sometimes I do not love the headlines. You're right, but I actually think it is more or less correct because, I am trying to be fair here. There are people who have been added to this cabinet, and there are decisions made in this cabinet that I think are really smart. He's appointed 3 Northern women to manage Northern Affairs, Indigenous Services, and Crown Indigenous Relations. And by all accounts, those 3 women are incredibly talented and capable, and I'm really excited and interested to see what they do, especially in a government that's super concerned about the Arctic, right? Our first Arctic-born, territorial-born prime minister. That's super interesting. That's fascinating. Marjorie Michel, the new MP for Papineau, who took over for Trudeau. She's the new health minister. I think that's a really interesting appointment. She's super qualified, right? So there are good things here. But, what is the top line? And on the top line, I think it's a confusing mismatch of decisions, right? You've kept certain people in their jobs despite their record not exactly being sterling. You've dropped people from gigs that they were kind of, mid-race on. And I think you risk a lot of the progress they were making. And you've appointed people in who really are not qualified by any stretch of the imagination, but who are successful political organizers. So the sort of top line of the whole thing is that Carney is clearly trying to solve this sort of symbolic problem, right? Trying to make himself look different than Trudeau, while simultaneously keeping around people who worked under Trudeau and were not necessarily super effective, while also sort of paying lip service to his organizers and his fundraisers in a way that I think is very transactional and problematic. So when you kind of do the whole kind of overview of the cabinet, I think it's a sort of change that puts this government kind of right back to where it used to be, and kind of neglects the moment, the opportunity to do something kind of bold and different.
So let's talk about the returning cast members, right? Because I know they're making a lot. Hey, we have 24 new fresh faces, but then you look at maybe the front line and boy, it looks awfully like the old front line. Let's talk about that rejigging and what you think went wrong there.
Yeah, I mean, you don't really have to look much further than the finance minister. François-Philippe Champagne is still Minister of Finance, and listen, by all accounts, there's a lot of good things to say about his approach to politics. But between him, former Treasury Board and Industry Minister Anita Anand, Chrystia Freeland, former Finance, currently in Transportation, Melanie Joly, who is Foreign Affairs, now goes to Industry. This crew of people helped really codify Trudeau's economic approach to governance. And, I can think of no better symbolism of all of this than the fact that they all were heading to Rideau Hall to be sworn in. And at that moment they were walking onto the grounds, Honda announces that it's ripping up plans to build a big EV factory in Ontario, and they're moving all that capital to the U.S. Well, we plowed in like $15 billion worth of subsidies, not quite that much. We plowed in billions of dollars worth of subsidies, and clearly it didn't work. So we're now kind of rewarding and keeping around a team of people who very much pioneered this sort of corporate welfare program. A new study just came out, by the way, that basically shows that this government tripled its corporate welfare programming without any obvious results. We're keeping them around, and Mark Carney says he wants to do things differently. It's hard to buy that, especially when you consider you have someone like Carlos Diado, the former Quebec finance minister, who's now sitting in caucus cooling his heels because he wasn't invited into cabinet. Yeah. Here's one of the only guys who got Quebec into better growth than Ontario and who got budget surplus in Quebec, which, as we know, is not the easiest thing to do. And he's not been invited into cabinet. I find that really hard to wrap my head around.
And like, listen, for Carlos Leite, it doesn't have to be finance minister. You can still find another way, like treasury secretary. That there were other roles that you could have found a spot for Carlos Leite, and I think it is interesting what you point out there. I want to talk to you about Melanie Joly for a second, because it's not lost on me. I remember your column when Melanie Joly had this disastrous performance at a security conference, and I remember you had this stinging critique. Matt Gurney had a stinging critique on air, on radio, on our Big Five segment. We laid into her at the time and saying, boy, this is not good. And, Melanie Joly was on CJAD yesterday. She was on Montreal Now with Aaron Rand. And she once again said, hey, I've been asking to get out. This is what I wanted. I want to be out of foreign affairs. What's your take on the shuffling of Melanie Joly out of foreign affairs?
Yeah, it's really hard to describe. So listen, I think she should have been removed from her job last year. I think she should have been removed from her job before that. I think she probably should have never been appointed into the job. I think, especially in our current moment, having a foreign affairs minister who is unbelievably well-read and understands the particulars of our current crisis moment, really important, and I don't think that's her. I think she would even admit that to some degree. But I will say, over the last couple of months, I've been talking to people who deal with her, talking to people in government, outside of government, and they've said, listen, she seems to have been taking this more seriously. She seems to finally kind of be getting her sea legs, and we're seeing some progress in some of these files. And, does that mean she should have stuck around in the job? I don't know. The fact that she was asking for this change herself, I find really frustrating. If you weren't committed to the foreign affairs job, you should have left before now, frankly, because this is such an important moment between Trump, between our new kind of integration into Europe, between the war in Gaza, the war in Ukraine, everything else, right? Yeah. If you're not committed to foreign affairs, then why are you there? And to replace her with Anita Anand, who's super capable, has zero foreign policy experience, frustrates me. Like, what are we solving for here? And again, moving Melanie Joly into industry, interesting. She doesn't really have a ton of economic experience, right? Her experience is in kind of law and marketing and politics. And not convinced that, especially in this moment where we have a productivity crisis, we're facing a trade war and all these other things, that you should keep moving around people who are recognizable, who are popular political figures, but who don't necessarily have the wealth of experience that you'd want to hit the ground running. Yeah. And again, to move them out as they're kind of midway working through some big files risks delaying those files in a major way. So I'm just sort of frustrated by what they were trying to solve for here, and I'm not sure I can 100% appreciate what it was beyond just kind of optics and politics.
Justin, before I let you go, I want your just quick take on that day. It was 2 days ago, that day where it just seemed it was ministers putting foots in mouths day for the Carney cabinet, whether it was Sean Fraser talking about how he's going to be working so much from home, and the Gregor Robertson, the new housing minister, talking about how housing does not have to, the price of homes does not need to drop. Was that indicative of maybe what we're going to see moving ahead from some of these ministers?
I mean, listen, I do appreciate that at least our ministers are willing to speak their mind in a way that maybe they weren't over the last couple of years. That's something. But I actually just wrote a column today in the Star looking at Gregor Robertson's comments and the fact that he's not only kind of made this comment that housing prices should not go down, but he's doubled down. He said on Twitter yesterday saying, no, I believe what I said. We need more affordable housing, but not a reduction in home prices. That's absurd. That makes no sense. That is completely paradoxical. So I do, listen, this is a new government. People are still figuring out their place in all these things. Some of these people are new to federal politics. There still needs to be this kind of assertion from Carney of the standards and the expectations. But I don't know. I'm a little worried. I think this is what happens when you solve for personality above competency. You get people coming out and just torching your government's entire position on things because they're freelancing their opinions when they get asked by a reporter.
Justin, I got a note from a listener saying, Elias, your guest right now is talking about the cabinet is beyond excellent, triple exclamation mark. I agree with that assessment. Justin, really loved your piece in the Toronto Star, and I'll direct all of our listeners to go check out your columns.
Thanks for having me.
Justin Ling, contributing columnist over at the Toronto Star. And do go check out that columnist that just came out, plus the one from earlier in the week on the cabinet.